Picture this. You're on a massive cargo ship, right in the middle of the ocean. A massive storm hits. Waves are violently crashing over the deck. The vessel is taking on water fast, and the captain is staring down an absolute nightmare of a dilemma. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating piece of the law of the sea. Specifically, we're going to unpack the concepts of general average and the York-Antwerp rules.
So here is the ultimate maritime puzzle. To stop the ship from going under and to save the crew, the captain absolutely has to throw heavy, incredibly expensive goods overboard. We call that jettisoning. But when the storm clears, who actually absorbs that massive financial hit? Is it just the wildly unlucky owner whose cargo happened to be tossed? Well, think about it. If that were the case, nobody would ever agree to have their cargo loaded last, right? This exact dilemma is what gave birth to the incredible centuries-old concept of shared risk. To figure out how the maritime industry actually handles this, we've got to take a quick trip back in time. Back in 1801, during a famous English legal case called Berkeley v. Prescave, Justice Lawrence laid it all out. He ruled that all loss which arises in consequence of extraordinary sacrifices made or expenses incurred for the preservation of the ship and cargo comes within general average and must be borne proportionately by all who are interested. Basically, he hit the nail on the head. If one person's stuff is sacrificed so everyone else survives, then everyone who benefits from that survival has to chip in to cover the loss. It's a giant pool of shared responsibility. Okay, so here's our roadmap for This Explainer. First, we'll cover exactly what general average is. Second, we'll look at the York-Antwerp rules. Third, we're going to calculate some shared maritime losses. Fourth, we'll break down sacrifices and expenses. And finally, number 5, we'll get into the 2004 rules controversy. Let's get into it.
Section 1. What is general average? Let's look at the philosophy of shared risk.
The actual legal boundaries here are super specific and honestly pretty fascinating. A General Average Act kicks in when, and literally only when, any extraordinary sacrifice or expenditure is intentionally and reasonably made for the common safety to preserve property from peril. You really have to pay attention to the specific wording there. The act has to be extraordinary, so we're not talking about normal everyday expenses of running a ship. It also has to be done intentionally, meaning if a massive wave accidentally washes a container overboard, that doesn't count. And above all, it has to be for the common safety of the entire maritime adventure. That's the ship, the cargo, the whole shebang.
Moving on to Section 2, the York-Antwerp rules and how we standardize the high seas.
Now, you might be thinking there's some kind of global maritime police force enforcing all these payouts, right? Well, actually, no. General average is governed entirely by private, voluntary agreements. The York-Antwerp rules are essentially standard guidelines that the shipping industry just voluntarily agrees to include in their contracts. Looking at the timeline, these rules were first put together way back in 1890. But, as global trade exploded, they had to evolve. We saw a major update in 1974, and then the 1994 revision really became the modern standard that everyone accepted. Then came another major revision in 2004. So these rules are constantly shape-shifting to keep up with the crazy complexities of modern trade.
Section 3. Calculating shared maritime losses. Let's break down the math of equity.
Okay, let's play out a scenario so you can really see how this financial equity works in practice. Let's say cargo B, which is valued at 100,000 rupees, had to be tossed overboard to save the ship. The very first thing we do is calculate the total contributory value. Basically, we're pooling everyone's financial stake together. So we take the arriving value of the ship, let's call it 200,000, add cargo A at 150,000, and the freight at 50,000. Now here's the absolutely crucial part. We also throw in the made good value of the sacrificed cargo B, which is that 100,000. Why on earth do we include the cargo sitting at the bottom of the ocean? Because the person getting compensated shouldn't end up in a better position than the people paying them. Add all that up, and our total contributory pool is 500,000 rupees.
And this right here is where the math works its magic. Because the sacrificed cargo B was exactly 20% of that 500,000 rupee pool, the loss is spread out so that everyone contributes exactly 20% of their own individual value to cover it. So when we look at the final net saving, the ship, cargo A, the freight, and even cargo B itself all take a 20% hit, which means every single party walks away with an 80% net saving. It's a flawlessly equitable system. No single owner is totally wiped out, and the burden is shared perfectly across the board.
Section 4. Sacrifices and expenses explained.
Let's look at the actual general average procedure. So it's important to know that a General Average Act isn't always just dramatically chucking crates into the ocean. There are really two main buckets here: sacrifices and expenditures. A sacrifice is that direct physical loss. So yeah, jettisoning cargo, or in a really desperate emergency, a ship literally burning its own wooden parts as fuel just to keep the engines running. An expenditure, on the other hand, is an operational cost you simply have to pay to finish the voyage safely, like having to hire tugboats to rescue a stranded ship or paying to unload and store cargo at a safe port while the ship gets emergency repairs. Both of these are done for the common safety of everyone, so both of them trigger that shared risk pool we just talked about.
So what actually happens when this battered, bruised ship finally limps into port? It kicks off a highly orchestrated sequence of events. First, the master of the vessel officially declares general average based on whatever threat they just survived. Step 2, they bring in an average adjuster. This is a highly specialized professional hired by the ship owner to figure out that giant mathematical puzzle we just did. Step 3, before any of the surviving cargo is allowed to leave the dock, the owners of that cargo have to sign an average bond. It's a legally binding promise that they're going to pay their calculated share. And finally, step 4, the cargo is handed over, but cash deposits are held in a special joint trust account until the final math is fully settled. It's an incredibly organized way to deal with absolute chaos.
Section 5. The 2004 rules controversy and an industry divided.
You know, as well-oiled as this system is, tweaking even 1 or 2 rules can cause a massive standoff in the industry. Let's look at the friction between ship owners and cargo underwriters. Under the 1994 rules, things like salvage remuneration, paying the folks who rescue the ship, and the wages for the crew while the ship is stuck at a safe port were totally allowed to be thrown into that shared general average pool. But then came the 2004 revision, which the cargo insurers pushed really hard for. The 2004 rules completely exclude those salvage allowances, and they also refuse to cover the crew's wages during those repair detentions. This completely shifts who ends up footing the bill.
And that shift caused some major shockwaves. BIMCO, which is one of the biggest international shipping associations out there, pushed back hard. They officially recommended that all their members just stick to the old 1994 rules. From their perspective, the 2004 rules are much less favorable to ship owners, and they argue it just shuffles costs between different insurance groups without actually fixing or improving the system. It got so heated that BIMCO literally instructed its members to cross out the phrase "any subsequent amendments" from their contracts. They wanted to be absolutely sure no one accidentally got locked into the 2004 updates. It just goes to show how fragile and intense these private negotiations can be.
And really, that brings us to the most important takeaway from this whole explainer. General average is this beautifully delicate balance of shared risk. We are talking about a highly sophisticated, centuries-old legal and mathematical machine. But the wild part? It is held together completely by private voluntary contracts, like the York-Antwerp rules. There is no overarching global law forcing anyone to do this. It works purely because ship owners, cargo owners, and insurers all over the world voluntarily agree to cooperate.
Which leaves us with a pretty massive question to think about. As international trade continues to explode, as cargo ships get ridiculously huge, and as insurers fight tooth and nail over every single penny, can voluntary private agreements like the York-Antwerp rules actually survive? Or are modern shipping complexities going to force this into becoming mandatory international law? It is definitely something the maritime world is going to be wrestling with for a long, long time. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep asking the big questions.